because we believe that developing countries can't host a large sporting event because it's a luxury they cannot afford. The situation is that if you want to host a large sporting event, which is a global event, which allows a large amount of nations to participate in your country for a sporting event that creates a need for stadiums, infrastructure, and a whole lot of other large investments, which makes this sporting event possible. But the thing is, developing countries have a host of have a social economic situation where they still need a lot of development. Not all basic needs are met for all people. There are people, for example, in Brazil who still live in poverty. And what the problem that arises is that all resources that go in this investment for stadiums and infrastructure can't be allocated anymore into developing the country in any way possible. So I will explain why this is relevant and important by explaining what impact this has in the host country, what role the FIFA plays in this all, and what the responsibility is of the international community. So let me first outline how the host country, why it has the socio-economic development that's still lacking. These countries have, for some reason, are politically stable enough to develop themselves economically to support the middle class. But this middle class doesn't include everybody yet. It doesn't give means to the entire population. There's still a large body of people who live under the poverty line. Take Brazil, for example. There are people in the last 10 years, 40 million people alleviated from poverty, but there are still millions and millions that are in the poverty situation. They don't have they can't access education system, they can't access the health care system, and the infrastructure they need to move freely isn't available for them there. So what needs to happen is there needs to be an investment. But if you, as Brazil, need to do an investment of 20 billion to host a sporting event and create stadiums, for example, I don't know exactly what the village is called, but it's a village that is surrounded by water, only accessible by planes, and there is a stadium built there for hundreds of millions of euros, which could have gone into developing this village by itself. So we think this is not of the primary importance in that country, and it's a luxury they cannot afford. The FIFA that comes into play is an organization that has a profit incentive. It's there to make sure for them, the sporting event is as profitable as possible. So they make contracts with multinationals, for example with Budweiser, where they went to Brazil and said, well, we have a contract with Budweiser, they sell beer in the stadiums, you have a law that says you can't sell beer in the stadium, you change that law, and you make sure we kind of hold the contract with Budweiser. Also, it's mandatory to build fast food places around the stadium, so all the money is spent at the fast food places. It doesn't support the local people there. It doesn't support the people that actually need it most, that are in this social economic development themselves. Sorry. We think that we should not allow these an organization like FIFA to create a mandatory rules or regulations that undermine the populace in that particular country.
Yes. Yes, sir. Maybe FIFA is very bad. Maybe it will earn some money dishonestly. But even though, don't you think that it will force all these countries to develop, and this development will force also will impact good on the society? Will, for example, give them more money, for example, from the development, from the jobs which will be created by, for example, new hotels built, new airports built, new.
I've just shown you that the FIFA that actually directs everything that goes along with the investments and with the needs. So they have all the contracts, and they decide where the money is allocated. And it doesn't go, and you can only spend the money once. So even if the government sees, okay, we need to 3 more stadiums, that money can be spent another time on education, on infrastructure, etc. That's far better spent on the people themselves than on some luxury they cannot afford, like a stadium that they're not. The stadium I gave the example in the small village, there is not a football club there that can actually use that stadium. It's only used for 3 matches and then it's empty forever. So that's a waste of money. So thank you. So we as an international community need to take responsibility and see that this is a global sporting event and creates global entertainment. But it can only do so when there's actually no harm done. And we think with the resource allocation away from developing these countries and supporting these people into big infrastructure and architecture buildings that don't benefit the people directly, we should recognize this fact and say, this is a luxury you cannot afford. For example, also now in Qatar, there's also a big sporting event, which is actually because the Qatar government by themselves is not as democratic as you would like it to be. They actually hire migrants to work there, and and to build these stadiums in this heat. And it is estimated that 4,000 people will die to build these stadiums. Should we allow this to happen, or do we take responsibility to show, okay, this is a global sporting event, but people shouldn't be harmed trying to create this sporting event? Greece, when they held the World Cup, actually almost went bankrupt trying to do this sporting event. Germany, for example, is the only country that actually profited from holding a sporting event because it was a luxury they could afford. They already had the infrastructure, the buildings were already there, so they didn't have to do this great investment. So because we want to make sure the host country develops itself properly, the FIFA has no incentive to support this country, and we as an international community should recognize this fact. We should propose this motion.
Okay, let's now welcome the proposition here.
And having proven and said several times that all over the World Cup has been held, but South Africa has been one of the best hosts of the World Cup, and they are an NIC country. So in terms of capability, we think they already lose a bit, right? But before anything else, let's go into this idea of rebuttal. And the first thing they told us was affordability, and the fact that, listen here, people can't afford, we're just incapable. And we have 3 responses to that. Let's say 1, in the bidding process for or to run a World Cup, countries have the choice to enter that process. And we think when they think they are not capable enough, then they wouldn't enter that particular process. We think they have the ability to have a cost-benefit analysis as to whether or not they're financially capable, and countries that do bid for this particular tender or this particular hosting of the World Cup or any international competition believe that they are capable and believe that they can do it. But secondly, we tell you that costs are not only on this particular company. Like you said, FIFA in most cases pays 50% and the country pays 50%. And we tell you here that the logical conclusion is 50% is better to pay over not getting a profit. And what we tell you here is that we'll show you the benefits ripped from hosting an international tournament is way better than the status in which the country will stay in. But then the second idea of social welfare, and what they told us here is that people are poor and it's quite sad, and that is just why we shouldn't host World Cups. We'll tell you why. Because people are poor, there is a need for such huge projects that better and enhance the growth of and accelerate the growth of this particular country. But we'll tell you that hosting a huge international tournament puts pressure on government to better the social status and the welfare of these particular countries. Because if you're bidding for a World Cup, you have to be capable, you have to have a good image, and you have to have some sort of good social welfare. And we think we put pressure on government to better the statuses. But by their logic, just because people are poverty-stricken, it doesn't mean we should have international competitions. Because by their logic, then no one would run them. We think America's very rich, but they also have a poverty-stricken society. We just don't think poverty is the reason why people shouldn't be able to run tournaments. Because if that was the case, then we wouldn't have a World Cup, because every country has a certain amount of poverty within it. So by their logic, it doesn't work out for them. But we'll prove two things to you. We'll firstly prove that the hosting of these particular competitions allows for a large growth as well as a large investment in the economy, which is what these NICs need at this point in time. But we'll tell you that these particular projects allow for patriotism, allow for nation building, which again allows for unity in these countries, which is what they do need in these particular countries. First idea, we tell you here that these projects allow for economic relief as well as economic growth. And we tell you here that already the nature of these countries is that they're very industrialized and very industrial heavy, right? And what we tell you is that if you have the responsibility to produce for a bigger and a larger population, which is the world in this case, right? We think one, you produce in larger numbers, which means this is mass production. It means one, the cost of production is lowered, and two, the cost of the unit when you sell it out to the individual is less expensive. What does this mean? Now take it. It means one, these countries have a comparative advantage compared to other countries that are producing this particular good or this particular product or service in these particular economies. So what does this mean? It means for the very same poor people he was talking about, they're able to afford, because prices are lowered, because of the mass production and the idea, the logic that they're producing for a larger population or larger amounts of people. But we tell you that the increased demands calls for an increased supply. And here we tell you that because these countries are already industrialized, it means businesses are forced to grow their plants, right? We think it's different for a company to produce for 10 people. But when you're suddenly producing for billions of people, it means you grow your industry. When you grow your industry, it means you grow infrastructure. And here we tell you that in developing nations, in most cases, their primary sector have a lot of unskilled people. What does this mean? It means you teach people how to build industries, you teach people how to increase and to maintain infrastructure, which means more people that are unskilled are hired, because this is hard labor, unlike intellectual labor. This means that people on the ground that are poor in their world are hired because they're taught how to build a room and they build it, or they're taught how to increase and better the functionality of an industry. This means more employment because these companies need to grow. They need to meet the demand of the international community, or they need to meet the demand of the international consumer bases, right? So we think one, you create jobs. But we think two, you create entrepreneurship. What does this mean? It means because countries like South Africa and a lot of developing nations, I'll take you in a minute, right? Are very diverse and cultural. It means businesses that are very cultural based are now popping out because they want to show their capability and their distinct culture to the rest of the world. We saw this happen in South Africa, where a lot of people that did creative arts suddenly boomed and they were sponsored by government to become better entrepreneurs. Yes.
Yeah. Do you know that the companies that build those stadiums, that create that so-called infrastructure,
yes,
are mostly multinationals from other countries?
Cool. They're multinational. But that stadium is built in South Africa. And it's so big that it needs so many people to maintain it and maintain the infrastructure and its existence. We think those people are local citizens. We think the maintenance of these stadiums and the maintenance and the growth of these particular stadiums are from local people. We think that in itself, a cleaning job is better than nothing because you get an income to sustain yourself, unlike in your world where no one is sustained and everyone remains poor. So we think here you create entrepreneurship. And here we tell you that you create entrepreneurship on a local level because you expose people to new industries and you expose people to new demands, where people are interested in tourism, where people are interested in the distinct culture of these countries and the distinct diversity of these countries. You encourage people to start their own businesses, but more than that, you encourage government to invest in new businesses. So even after the World Cup has left, you have people that are creative, you have people that attract people for tourist reasons, regardless of the World Cup. We think that in itself is creating jobs, that in itself is creating a better local market. But lastly, we tell you, you allow for diverse development. Here we tell you that during the World Cup, especially in South Africa, we had new initiatives that dealt with social welfare problems. Things like one goal. So you encourage people to invest in the country beyond the soccer. You encourage people to invest in the country beyond the nation building. You make them see problems that they themselves can invest in beyond the sport. We think that in itself means there's long-term and better investment than there was before. We tell you that NIC is already industrialized. Because of that nature, and because of that basis, they become even more industrialized with mass production, lower prices, affordability, more jobs, and a better standard of living. Show us why this marginal change is not better than status quo. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that fine speech, and now we invite the second speaker for opening government.
Yeah.
The case.
Thanks a lot, Madam Speaker, for the floor. So, in this speech, I'm going to try to bring you why it's not legitimate to hold such a tournament in these countries, why it doesn't make people happier actually, and most importantly, what are all these negative side effects we are discussing so far. First, I want to do some rebuttal on the last speaker. Well, actually, she was mentioning that the last World Cup in South Africa was a really well organized one. Well, we don't deny that, but we just say that it's irresponsible for such a country to invest the money in football. We don't say they can't hold it, they can't have a proper tournament, but we say those costs are those costs don't legitimize are too high to provide entertainment like football, which would also be done in other Western countries. Besides, she was depicting a very general image in which she was talking about, yeah, well, if there is a tournament, this will attract multinationals, this will, therefore, the local companies will also cooperate, things like that. Well, these things are already happening in these countries. Without a World Cup, these countries like Brazil, Indonesia are already very attractive for investors. They don't need such a World Cup. Besides, and that was what I was trying to bring you in my POI, who get all the big assignments for these stadiums, for the new roads, for all these things? Sit down, please. All those assignments go to the big multinationals, which are not owned by the host country. Besides, the tax they should pay via special restrictions that the FIFA says to such a country, the taxes that those multinationals should pay also don't go to the country or in a very minimum way. So mostly it just stays with the FIFA and with the multinationals. Besides, I have to admit, those multinationals create temporary jobs, but when they leave the country, those jobs will also disappear because the things have been built. But the maintenance of those buildings, the maintenance is not paid by these multinationals, no. The maintenance is paid by the government, by tax money. So, no, later on. That brings me to my first point, and that is why we don't think it's legitimate. Well, besides the allocation point, and besides that you can invest in roads, you can invest in metro lines, you can invest in education without holding such a World Cup, we think that's even more efficient. What we see is that the people themselves don't want it as well. We see in Brazil that a lot of people, the majority, was protesting in polls, was saying as well that they were against the holding of this tournament. Why? Because they saw that all the money that was invested in the tournament didn't go to them. They wanted to have, they didn't want to have temporary jobs created by those multinationals. No, they wanted to have a more sustainable economy in which they would have jobs on a longer term, in which they would have better education, would have sit down. Sorry. In a sustainable economy. So the people themselves don't want it, Why do these tournaments go to those countries? Because it's a prestige project. The leading politicians of these countries, they want to have something to sell to their voting people. They think they can win votes by holding such a tournament. They don't make a proper neutral economic analysis. No, they think if I can attract this tournament to my country, I can say that this is an achievement of mine. I can be proud of this, things like this. They don't make the neutral economic analysis, which first proposition tried to tell you. To go to the second point, okay, so if it's not profitable, the only profitable World Cup was in Germany. Greece is still paying its loans for the Olympics of 2004. If it's not profitable, does it make people happier? What we've seen is that during those World Cups, people do indeed forget temporarily all these protest things. When people can be proud of the country that they hold such a thing like this, but this is temporary. What we've seen, done by science who went after this, that after the tournament has gone, people tend to forget it really quickly and carry again more about the daily life problems like the unemployment, things like this. It doesn't make people happier. Okay, if it's not profitable, if it doesn't make people happier, does it attract more investments in the long term? Well, what we see is that the average citizen, the average investor, forgets after a few years that the tournament has been given at all in that country. If you would ask people, where was the World Cup of football held in 2002? I think barely nobody would know it. So that reputation effect, which could be a point, is also very minimal. Okay, another side effect, because these countries are developing, they can't pay proper wages to builders. So what we see in Qatar, which is going to hold this World Cup, they actually have slavery. They have a lot of immigrants from Pakistan, that region, who they barely pay under very hard working circumstances. There is a risk that these people are going to die, as we said. If we would have held this tournament in a more prosperous country, they could have paid proper wages to these people. We wouldn't have the risk that building people would die. Let's see. Yeah, well, the large stadiums, after the tournament has gone, these stadiums are barely used. They are just standing there, but the government, the tax-paying people are maintaining that stadium while it actually isn't used. There was a Brazilian guy who named an advantage of the World Cup, and that was that the metro line in his area was built 1 year earlier than it would have been. This metro line would have already been built. So those advantages that are there are so minimal, the risks are so high. Well, I think I've said enough. Thank you.
And now we invite the Deputy Leader of the Opposition to continue their case.
So ladies and gentlemen, before I actually touch on my actual matter, I'm going to deal with a few issues of rebuttal from this side of the house. So firstly, we established the fact that they were mainly based on the on the illegitimacy of why these countries should actually not host the World Cup, which is also generally just based on the assumption that these countries are not capable, right? But we already told you in our very first speech that capability isn't necessarily an issue in this debate, because while these countries themselves bid to actually, host these very same tournaments, therefore we still tell you that we value the state autonomy of these very same countries to actually hold these tournaments. But I'll further touch on that later on in my speech. So firstly, on why it's actually not legitimate. Well, they tell us that these countries are not responsible to actually host this football, to actually hold these tournaments in the first place. Now the clash, so we directly clash with that. We tell that, ladies and gentlemen, we tell that it is the responsibility of these very same countries to do so, because if they themselves say that government has the mandate to actually provide to very same people, and it's actually still developing, we think that government's mandate is still then fulfilled through this, because then it's within government's responsibility to find different mechanisms in which it can still cater to those very same issues within the country. And therefore, if hosting a football tournament brings in money to the country, well, then government has the legal responsibility to manipulate mechanisms in which which will actually better its functionality. Sit down, right? And which will actually better its functionality. On the second level, they tell us that, well, these countries already have investment, and well, this is just not legitimate investment. First of all, we tell that, ladies and gentlemen, that is not a legitimate reason as to why these countries should firstly not host these tournaments. But more than that, we tell that it only accelerates investment within these countries. We think that it makes it faster within those very same countries. Therefore, money comes in, development growth then goes faster, right? We don't necessarily see what's the problem within that, especially if they themselves also have a problem with the fact that there isn't sufficient development within these NICs, right? Well, then they tell us that multinationals don't contribute sufficiently to the development of the country, because while with FIFA already their taxes are limited. We tell that with the corporate social responsibility that these multinational companies have, already within that sovereignty of that very same country, they have the obligation to give back to society. And with the triple bottom line principle, it goes beyond economical too. So assuming that this whole tax idea did stand into this debate, we tell that they still give back to society. Do things such as job creation, which is a social level. Do things such as go green projects, which also contribute on an environmental level. We still think that these multinational companies do contribute to this country's development, to this country's infrastructure and development at the end of the day. Well, but lastly, they then tell us that people don't want this, and that people don't want this, and government should then follow what these people basically what the people want. Firstly, we tell the government has the responsibility and has the authority to do what's right for its people, even when people themselves don't value it. This is basically the social contract theory principle. We think that government can do what's best for its people, where we basically measure utility at the end of the day. So I think the utility into this debate lies on government, even when people don't want these very same World Cups, when government actually still hosts these very same tournaments at the interest of generating more profit or the more money and investment into the country to ensure development. But more than this, we don't necessarily think that this is true. We think that Brazil is just one example out of a lot of countries, such as South Korea and South Africa. We think that people do want this because people value patriotism in their very same countries, right? But more than that, we tell that that's not necessarily what it's about. It's about the after effects that actually come from that at the end of the day. Yes, sir.
Yeah, you talk about utility, but we've explained that the politicians don't take in the long-term utility into account, only short-term utility, as not being a rational actor of seeing cost benefit, but I'm making a political decision to cater to the electoral needs.
Please sit down, sir. We tell that the utility in today's debate is not hearing out people who are not even certain and say that, well, they don't want to host the FIFA World Cup because they're insecure of the fact that there won't be service delivery at the end of the day. But then the utility in today's debate is when governments allow for investment because they know that they achieve greater profits at the end of the day. And I think that basically means that government's mandate is fulfilled at the end of the day, right? But then that's the utility cost in today's debate. So now let's see, just we then come to my issues of contention, right? So firstly, I'll be generally looking at national nation building, right? So firstly, ladies and gentlemen, we tell that this actually allows for productive workforce within these countries, right? And this for productive workforce within these countries, right? We tell that the people within these very same countries then become productive. At the end of the day. This is simply because, they have just this general one common goal, which is to better the development of those very same countries, right? This is basically influenced by things such as patriotism, as well as the fact that they burden with the issue that the very same country is gonna host that very same tournament, right? We think that this is good because it ensures functionality within people, and when the workforce of that very same country is then productive and functional, we think that those are one of the important things that cater to development, right? But more than that, we tell that in general, it incentivizes development within countries. It incentivizes development within countries themselves. We think that when governments, when countries host these very same tournaments, we think that governments themselves are therefore burdened to work hard and to ensure that they to ensure stability and growth within their very same countries. But more than that, we think that with proper policy, we only undermine these countries' capabilities to develop at the end of the day. We think that when we stop them from actually hosting these very same tournaments, it sends out the idea that, well, you're basically not capable, and you have certain limits and extensions in which you can actually, ensure or stimulate development within your country. We think that this is the very same factor that they're trying to implement in today's debate. But because of that, well, then they limit development or development policies within these countries. And I think that already that itself kills development or rather undermines the development. Or rather undermines these countries' ability to actually develop at the end of the day, right? So because of all of that, ladies and gentlemen, we tell that development within these countries, development of infrastructure as well as economic growth in general is actually achieved better and faster with these very same investments from hosting World Cup tournaments. We've seen it in South Korea, ladies and gentlemen. We've seen it in South Africa, and because of that, we went to this debate.
Okay, thank you for this fine speech, and now we call upon the member of government to continue his proposition.
Ladies and gentlemen, we as a second government party, we blame the side opposition to be absolutely immoral in this case. I will show you on the examples how this behavior is absolutely immoral to host some sport activity in these countries, and therefore we think that they already failed in the sense of humanity, and I will show you how we should improve the situation by not hosting these tournaments in countries that are in development. Well, I was talking about morality. The first thing is that if the tournament is hosted in some country that is NIC or is in development, and you told that it's not a responsibility of government to host this tournament, if the citizens are not happy with this tournament, they are going to protest. We have seen in Brazil a lot of examples of protests in street, of attacking shops, of destroying such activities. No, stay in the chair, please. So we saw that, no thank you, we saw that the citizens of the country feel that this tournament is not the right thing. And what's the most important to do as a country to be helpful to citizens and to citizens. So this is this is the thing we care about. We care about morality. And so first extension that I would like to talk about is that it's not only a responsibility of this country, it's responsibility of whole world that they are empowering not they are other countries are making money of that cut that is paid by the government, no thank you, of the specific country. Let's say that some World Cup in Brazil costed, I think you thought 20 billions of dollars. Let's say the return from this tournament was $100 million. So we can easily calculate how much they throw away. I will continue. And these tournaments are the products of world companies are being sold on this tournament. So companies like Coca-Cola, Microsoft, and these all companies are building their own marks and they are selling their own products on this cup. So actually these workplaces we are talking about that are for citizens, these are unqualified jobs that are not being paid very well, no thank you, that are not being paid very well, that are not really beneficial, they are for a few months and then it's finished. So it's the problem that other people are making profits on this country. So it's immoral, so therefore we would ban these cups in these countries. So I will continue that you thought that only profitable tournament was in Germany. Yeah, because Germany could manage that. And in fact, the most profitable, the most profiting countries are the ones who are selling their products to the championships without any investment that has to make the country that is being developed. Don't you agree?
Yeah.
We don't agree because you base the assumption that we should always listen to people. If that was the case, then gay marriages wouldn't be legal in other countries because everyone has different views. Governments are there to do what's best for the country and implement mechanisms that better social welfare, which is hosting international.
Well, thank you. I will continue with it. I think that protests of a lot of homeless people and the people that are living under the borders of poverty is very strong argument to not do these tournaments in these countries. We have seen a lot of pictures from Brazil, we've seen a lot of things, a lot of protests, and I think that Brazil is a great example of this possibility and these things, no thanks. So, we have another extension that is not based on the blaming for this situation. We would take an action. It's our second extension. We would like to take action in the using of this budget that was used on some World Cup. Yes?
So we tell you that when people work at lower maintenance companies like cleaning a stadium, that's better than nothing, which is happening in your status quo where people aren't employed, they don't have income and they can't better their standard of living.
Thank you. So they spend $11 billion to have their citizens working for them of stadium. No thank you. So let's take this budget of $11 billion. We should invest this money into the development of country. The development that was mentioned by second speaker is, or the investment that was mentioned by second speaker is not in fact any investment. It's putting money in the stadium that will be after the games will be abandoned and will not be used. So it's just throwing money out of the window. So we don't absolutely agree that this is an investment. So let's take this budget and use it for schools, for building roads, for solving homelessness, for treating diseases.
Okay,
And I will, thank you. Yes?
So first of all, you don't show us how you make yourself better the status quo that you did. But we've seen it happen in countries like China where they've hosted the Olympics. We've seen it in South Korea where they themselves have hosted the Olympics. This has stimulated this has brought in a lot of investment, which has stimulated growth. Tell us then how you then better the very same conditions that you complain
Why
about.
should invest in the growth of this from this side if you can invest in the most crucial things that are not provided by the country? Like if you take NIC countries, if you look at a map of the world and you see that in these countries, well, you told that there is good industrialization, that we absolutely agree, not angry, but agree. But the problem of these countries is not that they are not industrialized enough, that are not able to apply for this possibility. But we want to say that we have other problems in that countries that are invisible for viewers of these games. Well, so we are only building Potemkin's village, like to show we have no problems here. We are absolutely economically high. We don't have these problems. We have seen on Sochi that they are showing we like sport. We are not fighting against Ukraine. Brazil wanting to show that it's developed enough, but we care about citizens. We should invest in roads. We should improve the poverty. I will give you examples of countries in this So for example, poverty is in Brasilia, China. We have homelessness in Brasilia. China doesn't take proper care of citizens. So we would take this budget, and instead of building stadium that will be abandoned or that will be just, look what we have, we would put this money into the schools, into treating diseases, into the things that we think that are more beneficial. So the investment that you mentioned is not in fact an investment, and the image of the country is just for image, and we are hypocrites if we do that. This is why I think government should win this debate. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the fine speech. We will move back to the position down the bench.
Madam Speaker, ladies and gentlemen, at first I'd like to respond to what was previously said. But, well, I'd like to tackle this argument about the people from the organizing state who disagree with organizing a tournament in their country. Well, the fact that they disagree, that a certain group of people do not agree on certain action of the government, doesn't mean that this is the opinion of entire society, and we would have to call a referendum to know whether the society really do not want such tournaments. And what is more, this is the point of indirect democracy, that we elect people who are professional and who can better predict the consequences of their political actions, and therefore we can suspect that average citizens do not have proper knowledge to assess the consequences of organizing such a tournament in their country. Well, the main point of disagreement between both sides seems to be the economic aspect.
Sir.
Thank you. And I would like to analyze the aspects from two perspectives. Well, the first argument that supports holding sport events in NICs is the immediate economic benefit that comes from holding such events. Well, the counter argument that you took out, for example, about stadiums and paying the fees to FIFA, etc. Well, these expenditures are only drop in the ocean of possible benefits, and actually organizing a sport event is an immediate economic boost for the country that sports the tournament. No, thank you. There are many new investments which results in lower unemployment. There is new infrastructure built, not only stadiums, but also, for example, roads, airports, hotels, etc. There are also profits from tourism, because there is increased demand on products for tourists, and where in free markets, where there is a rise in demand, there is also a rise in supply. So the profits from such products as sightseeing, accommodation, food or souvenirs rise during the lasting of the tournament. No, thank you. And the stakeholders, the beneficiaries of such state of things, are the local people, national people, who produce these products, and also the state, which benefits from taxation of these products. And the second aspect, the second phase of this economic aspect, are the long-term economic benefits. All the infrastructure built for the sport event stays. So these roads, hotels, etc. may be exploited also after a particular event. No, thank you. So, for example, building new airports, new roads, etc. Causes the development of transport, which results in facilitation of trade and hence economic benefits. Well, in the long run, the profits of all these investments exceed the costs, and money spent are really not expenditures, but rather investments, as I said. No, thank you. And the second aspect I would like to reflect upon is marketing. Well, the first phase of this aspect is promotion of the state, which again results in the income of tourists, which, as I proved before, boosts the economy of the organizing state. But also there is another side of this situation of promotion of the state, because the whole world watches the hands of the authorities of the organizing state, which is a great motivation for the authorities, for the government of the organizing state, to improve their policies so that they are commonly accepted. For example, to care more about the rule of law, about human rights, etc. For example, in Brazil, after being announced, the organizer of the World Cup increased spendings, for example, on fighting with drugs, etc., because the government of Brazil do not want to be remembered as the government of a country that has to deal with poverty and crime.
Sir,
thank you. Please be seated. And another phase of this marketing aspect is the promotion of culture. And culture may be here analyzed also in two ways, because we can talk about the promotion of the culture of sport inside the organizing country and outside the organizing country, which means the promotion of the values that stand behind sport, like fair competition, teamwork, respect to rivals, respect to rules, etc. But also it is the promotion of the culture of the organizing state outside this state, which leads to the preservation of the cultural heritage of this country. And it positively, therefore positively affects cultural diversity on a global scale. No, thank you. And what is more, I would like to note that the newly industrialized countries are somewhere in the middle between the less developed countries and the developed countries. They differ from less developed countries in a way that they have already certain infrastructure and some funds, but they also differ from the developed countries in a way that they still need a boost for their economy to flourish. And therefore they have enough funds to handle sport events, and even if they lack them, they will get this money back from the investments made for sport events, or they may apply for some help from international organizations. Nevertheless, they need a boost to develop their economies in order to achieve social welfare and means to secure the well-being of their people, which actually, I thoroughly believe, should be the aim of each political action. I thank you.
Okay, now it's time for the government to close their case.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is like buying a new expensive car. It is like great, you can travel. It is enjoyable because it's luxury. But what is the real effort of having this car if you don't have enough money to buy a dinner to your kids? If your kids are screaming that they are hungry, if your kids are telling to you that you are a bad parent, there has to be someone who takes the responsibility from you and never give you anymore, because you are doing something that someone who gave the responsibility to you, who elected you to the government, now is against you, and you don't listen to him because you are egoistic, because you were told that you are a football country, and now you just want to have some really expensive and not really affordable tournament in your country, and your country just suffer from this. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll go to the first point or clash I'll talk about in my speech, and it's the responsibility of the government. The second point I'll talk about is a benefit that come from these tournaments or sport events, and the third point is investment and our extension as we explained. So ladies and gentlemen, if we maybe have some benefit that we are enjoying the car as we bought it, we are enjoying the tournament at the moment. We maybe have a work for some people at the stadiums for 1 month in bad conditions. If this is a benefit, okay. But this benefit just takes 1 month. And ladies and gentlemen, if we lose 15 billion of dollars or whatever, then we cannot make the step from developing country to developed country. As these countries, these NICs, are somewhere between. And they have to develop themselves, as I show you in our extension argument, to become the developed country, and they cannot just lose the money. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, so Brazil government is just egoistic because they just want to have an tournament and look good in front of the whole world. But what are they forgetting about are the people who are protesting in the streets and people who don't want this tournament in their country, because these people know that they are suffering. They don't have enough food, they don't have a good education in their state, and these all things are able to solve. But only if we have those money to improve these things, wait a second, and then we can make our country developed enough and move somewhere and don't stay at this NIC level somewhere between.
But that whole argument is based on the fact that all countries and all people in these countries are angry. What about people that are not in Brazil, people that want this to happen? What about NIC countries of that sort?
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I don't know how it was in South Africa, but all countries who have to build 16 stadiums just for the football tournament, and all countries that have to build a whole infrastructure for thousands of football players that come to your country, and the effort is like 5% of the tournament, that is like in Brazil it's $100 million, then I don't think your country is really like enjoying the tournament in the long-term run. And if the country is looking at the long-term run, and if it sees what benefits and negative side effects it will bring. And ladies and gentlemen, we are talking about Brazil because it's like really actual, and this motion probably was made because of this tournament, and just because the people are really afraid of the tournament and know that they will suffer. Because the things that could be proven will not, because those money aren't there. And the country doesn't afford anything on the tournament because they're just losing the money, and the short-term benefits aren't enough to let those people invest all their money they have to some tournament that everybody will forget in 2 months. Okay, so next point is like benefits and the force that country will gain from the tournament. As we showed you at the side of government, the state in order to have the great football tournament, they have to invest amazing amount of money. And it was like really misunderstanding at the first table, because like first the opposition came here and told us that we have an amazing effort from the tournament. But ladies and gentlemen, it's not like that, because yes, we can say we have some short-term benefits. Wait a second. And we will gain something from the tournament, but it's not like we are affording money from the tournament. We're just losing money, and everybody knows that. And the people who are protesting in Brazil knows that, and that's why they're protesting, and that's why the government is responsible.
We've told you that building these stadiums needs labor, which means local labor. But secondly, entrepreneurship means more jobs. But loss in maintenance of this infrastructure means people are still hired.
Yes, this is exactly what I'm talking about. That you will maybe have a working place for I don't know, maybe many people. But it will be like for 2 months. And after those 2 months, your country still will be somewhere between developing and developed country, because you won't have any amount of money to develop your country. And we have to develop our country in order to have our people in the country happy, and in order to like let our society prosper. Our extension argument was like an investment. And like investors are only who gain some money from the tournament, because like Coca-Cola have amazing no, thank you. Like Coca-Cola is gaining money because they maybe made some workplaces in a country, but those people will have like bad condition work as it was in China through the Olympics, that people were dying at the building of a great stadiums, that people were working for $1 for a day, because those countries, like, they are not prepared to invest the millions of dollars to have these tournaments, and those countries aren't those that can afford investing so much people. So who will gain the money from this tournament is not the country that we would like to, not the people who live in the country, but this country and these people living in the country will just suffer, as we showed you, as a team government. So the benefits, it won't bring any benefits at the level of gaining some money in the long term or developing our country. The only benefit we can see here is like have a job for a month at the stadium as a cleaner. The responsibility of government, it is there until the government listens to their people, and if they stop listening to their people, we have to have someone who will take the tournament from those people and won't let them do this. And as we showed you, that we cannot let those countries have these tournaments, because those people just suffer, and if they don't want to have this tournament, like we shouldn't support these countries, and we have to take care about this, and that's why we want this organization to take this tournament. Thank you.
Okay, and now for the last speech of opposition side and for the whole debate, group speech first.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would like to sum up this debate from the side of opposition. I believe that we had 3 clashes in this debate. First clash, which I've called social situation. Second clash, which I've called profits and development, and what will really bring us profits and development. And the third clash, why especially newly industrialized countries should organize with events. First table just clashed about one thing, social situation. So the government said that people are poor, but in new industrialized countries should be focused on education, on welfare, on healthcare, and this will not develop them. Actually, this championship is just throwing money into nothing, and we actually prove that it will develop this country faster and better. And I will go to this in the second class to explain it. When you said that, actually, thank you, sir. And then you said that only FIFA would benefit from this. Actually, it's not true, because actually I would like to emphasize that FIFA is the organization which organizes only the World Cup in football, and it's the only such organization in the world, so it's actually an exception. For example, International Olympics Committee doesn't benefit from organizing championships. So it's the exception, it's only such organization. And even if it benefits thank you, sir. Even if it benefits somehow, still these objects which were built for championship are staying in this country, and they will benefit from this country, thank you, sir, which was not addressed at all by the government in the long term. And when that people don't want it, actually, maybe people don't want it, but strikes exist all over the world. And if any government would, for example, focus on any strike, they could do nothing. For example, in Poland there is now strike for 300 people, but the industry is closed. So should we close the industry, which is unrented, which brings us no money because 300 people want it? No, the government should focus on the good, on the wealth of the whole society. Thank you, sir. When you go to profits and development, what will bring us development? Closing opposition actually explained us that organizing great sporting events, Olympic Games, and so on, will bring us more development and faster development than anything else. And actually, it was not addressed at all by the government, by any team of government. Thank you, sir, because you just said that in long term it will bring us no profit. And you didn't say why it will bring us no profit. You don't answer to our clashes. You said that it will not bring, thank you, sir, it will not bring us no profits. And actually, my friend told us what profits it will bring in the long term. Firstly, the country will be promoted, because always television, press focuses on such events. Thank you, sir. And if, for example, it's not only about tourists which will go, and it's many tourists which can see this country and encourage their, for example, friends to go to this country, or to for example, return to this country, but it's also to people who are just interested in sport events, who are watching the sport events, and always by the sport, by for example sport events. Thank you, sir. They are discussed some things, attached to the country, and they will go to this country back. And actually, this country would be already developed because, as my colleague mentioned, also it was not also addressed by the government at all. This all infrastructure which was built will stay, and it's not only stadiums, which are of course unlimited and which will not give back this money for the stadiums, but also roads, airports. Thank you, sir. All roads, airports, hotels. It will all stay in these countries, which are often. Thank you, sir. Not so well developed or industrialized, and this and the increase in tourism will bring more tourists to this country, and more tourists will cause that the job will be kept by this movement. This is not just the job for 2 months. The increase in tourism will cause that that these people will get this job. Thank you, sir. And just going back, going further into development. Very soon, this develop. Okay. The country, let's look at who really gains the money on it. Okay, the government, it loses some money because it has to, the government has to build with all stadiums, has to build with all roads, and so on and so on and so on. And in short term, it really loses the money. But in long term, when the country is more developed, more industrialized, when more people go to the country, they will get this money back in taxes. And look at the society. They will get the money in short term because many tourists will go, and many tourists will stay in hotels. Many tourists will stay, for example, will use the airports, the roads, and many and will get the money, for example, from these tourists. Many people will buy something in this in short term and also in long term. Thank you, sir, because they will keep this money due to the increase in tourism. So society gains something in the long term and in the short term. Governments loses in the short term but gains something in the long term. And actually the aim of the government is to improve the conditions of society. Sir. Thank you, sir. What also my colleague proved to you, thank you, sir. What also my colleague proved to you is that it will force governments of new industrialized countries to deal with some social problems which actually exist in the society. For example, with these favelas. You said that the Brazilian government is actually egoistic. I wouldn't call it egoistic, but Brazilian government sends actually police to favelas to fight with drugs, or to fight with drug traders. So no, it's not egoist. It's actually dealing with important social problems which were not dealt before. And okay, maybe this, maybe the reasons are not very glorious because they do it only because they want to show their country from the best side, but still the results, the effects will exist. And the last thing, why especially newly industrialized countries, is very important, because the topic from this debate is this council believes that newly industrialized countries should not host international special events, sporting events, and we think that it should host them. Why a special event? Because it will, as we said, it will boost the economy, and newly industrialized countries are countries industrialized enough to invest in this economy and to invest in this sporting event. So they have money to invest in, which are not, for example, in the possession of non-developed countries or developing countries, and but they still need more development. So it is better for them to organize it than for the already developed countries. Thank you.